And we're back with another episode of What the Shell. So we're excited to be here today. This is actually a first for us with What the Shell. And it is actually our first recorded podcast. So tomorrow, or today, for those that are going to be watching it tomorrow, we actually had to pre-record this episode. I had a prior engagement. I have a wedding to attend. As well as our special guest this week has some family business to attend to. And so we wanted to make sure that you guys still get this podcast this week. And so we're experimenting with this pre-recording thing. But yeah, Ed, man, I'm excited about this one. Being a father of a young lady. My daughter's only 4 years old, but, watching her grow up and be inspired by reptiles.
Yeah.
It's funny that with my daughter, with the 25 turtles that I own, she still prefers snakes, and I am actually terrified of snakes.
You should have. I'm telling you, you should have let me know while I had them all, man. I could have hooked you up.
No, man. I've contemplated when she gets older getting her something like a sand boa that stays about this big.
Let's get a little ring neck or something, man. But then it'll get loose, and then you'll find a little warm somewhere.
Listen, man, I'm not going to get on this podcast and tell you what I do when I see snakes, but there are mothballs all around my house.
That won't stop them.
Listen, it's stopping them now. That works for me. But yeah, so we actually have a wildlife biologist named Jenna, who is known on Instagram as the Snake Princess. I reached out to her a while ago trying to get her onto the podcast, primarily because, at least in my experience, there seems to be a lack of females or women, that are out there working with reptiles. And so, I wanted to get that voice out there, at least publicly, in a podcast setting, to especially inspire our daughters, man. I mean, I know you and I have talked about influence and what we find important. And so, man, I think this episode is going to be a great one, especially for our viewers. What do you think, man?
I mean, honestly, to kind of touch base on what you said, that we don't know, if there's like a minority of,
Right.
It's like speaking to Jenna, prior to when we did, I think it could probably be as much as, giving them the, after I hope Jenna speaking inspires them to just almost put themselves out there. Because,
Right.
So many people probably do own and keep and whatever you might have, or even profession, but they're just not open about it. And not to say you have to be, you always have to be putting yourself out there, but, you're doing it from a different way of, how you're talking about with our daughters, and, and just in a way of influence, and realizing that you don't have to put yourself out there as far as like, oh, look at me. It's really just about like sharing the world with the world, like what you do, what you love. And that's really what it's all about, man.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not going to hold her up any longer. Let's go ahead and add Jenna to the stream. Hey, welcome to the show.
What's
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We appreciate it. How's the weather up there in Maryland where you're at right now?
Oh, it is phenomenal. It is probably just as hot here as it is in Florida right now, but just not quite as humid, so I can actually breathe.
Yeah, I don't see any sweat on your forehead. If I sat outside right now, I'd be drenched. But yeah, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, so that the viewers get a little background information on you.
Yeah, so as you guys said earlier, right now I'm actually a wildlife biologist in South Florida. And before that, I actually didn't live in Florida. I came from Maryland, and that's where I am right now. I'm visiting my family. And that is where I started. It's where I first got into reptiles. And I know in Florida I guess everywhere there's a big culture of like, oh, we go herping. So, people go out and go look for snakes and turtles. And where I grew up, we didn't call it herping. We just said we were going to go on a hike and look for stuff. And so herping was a whole new term that I just learned in 2016 when I moved to Florida. Which, it seems funny, but I had no idea what it was. So I grew up in Maryland. I didn't even get my first reptile until I was about 14 years old. I got a little ball python. I still have him today. And that kind of just spurred my real interest in working and keeping animals. I mean, I go outside. We didn't really have a television, so I was hike around a lot and see animals outside, but I never really thought about keeping anything until I turned 14. And I was like, people keep these as pets. Like, I want to do it. And my dad was nice enough to indulge me while my mom was out of town one weekend, and I got my first snake. And it's kind of just been, snowballing from there. Went to school for wildlife biology at Towson University in Maryland, and my college journey didn't even start as a biology major. I actually majored in zoo science in Doylestown, Pennsylvania at a private college. And I had every intention of working in a reptile house at a zoo. And that was my one goal in life. It's all I wanted. And after being in the zoo program for a year, I realized that I wanted to do more than just work in a zoo. And the program was really geared towards becoming a curator of a zoo facility. And so I switched majors, switched schools, finished a biology degree at Towson University. And I was lucky enough that right after I finished my biology degree, my major professor had a turtle project going on, and I was able to get involved with map turtle nesting. So that was my first, job experience paid wise. And before that, I actually did 2 years of diamondback terrapin nesting. So that's where I got first experience with anything was turtles. And then I was able to get the opportunity to come down to Florida in 2016 and pursue a graduate degree in wildlife ecology and conservation. And now I do a lot of work with exotics and crocodilians in South Florida.
That's pretty cool, going from, something a lot of people take for granted, a turtle, to, now being able to work with crocodilians. I'm curious, where was the research that you were doing with the map turtles taking place at?
So the map turtles actually is in northern Maryland. There's a little town along the Susquehanna River. And the projects that we worked on, me and actually one of my coworkers down in Florida, actually me and her both worked on the same map turtle project together before we worked together in Florida. We did a little bit of nesting. And then I did a little bit of looking at predation of nests. We have a couple spots in Port Deposit, Maryland, is a little town it's in. And there's a couple of areas that are really good nesting areas for these turtles. And for whatever reason, they get almost completely depredated every year by raccoons. I think the year that I did it, if I remember correctly, we had one nest that succeeded to hatch out of, over 20 or 30 nests, easy. So it's a really interesting study. They're still doing research there now. I believe that's through Towson University. But it was a lot of fun. There's a lot of really good people and resources up there.
I have a question. Where did you get your first snake?
I got my first snake from there used to be a little pet shop. I live in St. Mary's County, so it doesn't exist anymore. There was a pet shop up the road from my house called Critter Corner, and I got my first ball python there.
Now, was it just a normal?
Yeah, just a normal phase. He's, the sweetest snake I own.
How long would that be now?
Almost 11 years, almost 12 years, actually.
Yeah, I was just wondering because I didn't know, it's always, I'm always curious to see how people, because, with reptile shows and that's what first turned me on was reptile shows, because I did not know it was because I used to do the same thing you used to do in Ohio. It was go outside. My dad always hunting and fishing and this and that. But the moment I heard about my first reptile show and I started going, this was way back, 15 plus more years. And it's just be surrounded by animals. And it's crazy, to see the community coming together for that kind of stuff. People that share that kind of insane, don't even know, it's beyond passion. You get to like an addiction, it's just being surrounded by that. But yeah, I was just curious to see where you got that. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I live in the middle of nowhere. So hadn't even heard of like reptile expos or reptile shows. I never even knew that was a thing until I was in college. So it took me until around 2014, 2015 to know what a reptile expo was, and go to my first one. So I was a little slow on that one, but and of course it's distance. I live a couple hours from outside of Baltimore, and that's usually where a lot of the shows are, in Baltimore. So it wasn't until I went to school in the Baltimore area that I realized that it was actually a thing.
did that spark anything else, like as far as like almost like opening up a whole new world?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually was able to get a couple more snakes. I actually went up to Pennsylvania. I went to the Hamburg show and got two hognose snakes there. And before I moved to Florida, I only kept 4 snakes. I had 2 ball pythons and 2 Western hognose snakes, and that's what I moved to Florida with. And I talked to you guys a little bit about this the other day. I now have exponentially more reptiles. They tend to find you when you move to Florida, and so now I
I don't know
have a
what
whole
you're
house
talking
full.
about. They don't find me.
So how did that move transpire? Was it like hard? Like, cause I know like, some people can't wait to get out, like, especially, I can relate from up north and moving down south. Were you excited as far as like the whole demographic and different kind of animals, like a whole different almost like world for you?
Yeah, so like I said, like I never really got into herping or even like really thinking about other types of reptiles until I graduated college. I took a herpetology course my last year in 2015, and until then, like I had never even really even considered I guess even like research or looking into different species in different areas. Like I never considered it. It wasn't something that I thought about, because it's not something that I grew up thinking about. So it was all new territory for me. I was super excited to move down. Like I said, I have a coworker that I worked with in Maryland had actually gone down to Florida earlier. I came in July 2016, and she actually moved down in January 2016. And we always joked that I was going to follow her wherever she went, 'cause she was such a good friend of mine. And it just happened to work out that I ended up working in the same lab as her in South Florida. So I was super excited to go and to see my friend my friend that I had in college. I was excited to go and have new friends down there and get to see the new area. But it wasn't until I was actually in Florida, and I think the real shock for me was seeing a corn snake not in a pet store. That just blew my mind. So it wasn't really until I actually went out and started doing surveys and got to see, a snake that I'd only seen in captivity in people's houses, inside shops, that it really hit me that, these things are out there, and like they're everywhere, and I can find them if I just look. And it just kind of like, we took off from there.
Well, I don't know where Ed went, but we'll wait for him to come back. So I have a question for you. I know with your career, you're out doing studies and different things. How often do you think that you go herping outside of work?
So outside of work, it really just depends on who is available. So I love going with friends. I don't really like, I'm a social being. I love going out and looking for snakes with friends. I don't really like going out by myself. But I will have to say that when I first got down to Florida in 2016, 2017, I went pretty frequently. A couple times, maybe I say frequently, maybe like 2 or 3 times a month outside of work. Because I mean, my work, we go out every single day almost and look for stuff. So if I felt like I didn't get, I wasn't satisfied by what I saw at work, I would go out on weekends. And then last year actually was the first year that I didn't really do a whole lot of herping. I started going, I guess they started some python programs in Florida. So I went out a lot and looked for pythons. But as far as like actual herping to look for other species, probably 2017, 2018 were really big years. 2019, I didn't really go out at all. And then this year so far, I've had not a lot of people to go with, but I've had a lot of time. So I've been going, a couple times a month again this year.
You spoke on the Python thing and you searching. Is that more so like just seeing if it's real or like participating in those programs that you see on Facebook where the guy's like, look, I caught a 50-foot, type deal?
Yeah. So the programs are legit. I work a little bit with them through my actual job. But as far as just going out, it's more for, entertainment, at least for me. I know the pythons are real. I know that they're out there in forest. But I personally, I enjoy looking for them and finding them. Obviously it's not the happiest of things for the environment, and it's not the happiest of things for the snakes once they're captured.
Right.
However, it is, and at least from my point of view, it is something that is absolutely necessary and has to be done.
I'm curious, like when you're out there, looking for these snakes, are there like, all right, I'll take it to my basic knowledge of alligators. All right. If I'm out near the water looking for alligator, I see a slide or, I see, big dents in the grass and things of that nature. I'm like, okay, there could be a huge alligator. Like what do you look for when you're out recreationally? Like, how do you like this pond has a snake, like what are things that make you say, I need to check here, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so at least for me, I don't really look at. You'll if you see a python across a dirt road, you'll see the slide from the belly. You'll see, just like if any snake who slithers through dirt, you can see the belly slides. So that could be a good indicator if you happen to see that. But at least for me, mostly I just go out. I'll shine out the windows. I'll stand in the bed of the truck, and you just look for the actual snake, either in the grass, in the road, swimming. But as far as like location, you go off of, where other people have seen them. But to be honest, they're everywhere in South Florida. Like I don't think like if you're south, like you're gonna find them.
Gotcha. This might sound super ignorant, and I apologize, but like I fully believe my fear of snakes is from the movie Anacondas. So like when I think people out hunting for giant snakes or not giant snakes, like I just think about that scene where they're sitting on the boat and the snake comes out of the water and wraps around. Of course, I know that's not really happening, but in terms of like how they were hunting for the snakes, like I can't get that out of my mind. Like that's what I envision, people like yourself doing, like, hey, let's go spotlight gang, just out there. And it's incredible. I feel like I'll go out and, look for turtles the same way, with a spotlight looking in the water. Is that very similar to, like what you guys do, or I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not a participant in any of the programs or anything. I just go.
Right.
I'll go with someone who is a participant, just for fun. And
Right.
it's just driving around. It's like road cruising, just with spotlights. And it's nothing. It's not usually as exciting as you're remembering from the movies. The snakes are usually very, very calm. Until once you touch them, that's when they kind of get on the defensive. But
Right.
the snakes are very calm. They're not jumping out of trees or jumping out of the canals at you or anything like that. They're just out there living their everyday life, just trying to survive.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's like with any animal. Like I'm in a lot of Facebook groups, and I see people mention cottonmouths a lot, and they're like, they'll chase you, and people are like, the snake is not chasing you. Like the snake actually wants no part to deal with you. And so I think it's good that you mentioned, like, hey, we're in Florida, we're going through this coronavirus, like you can go out and look for some of these animals. And that's not saying to go and handle them and touch them, but like it's cool to see things naturally occurring. Like I love seeing Florida softshell turtles. I won't own one. I think they're like the devil in a turtle, but like when I see them, I appreciate them. I'm curious. What do you currently keep, animals wise?
Oh gosh, I have a whole list. So I have a mix of tortoises and snakes and a couple different lizards. So On the tortoise front, I actually have a handful of yellowfoot tortoises. I have a redfoot tortoise, a leopard tortoise, a Russian tortoise. Then I have a panther chameleon, a gargoyle gecko. I have a white tree frog who is, probably one of my favorite animals that I own right now. He's been with me for 3 or 4 years. So he's one of my four Florida children. And then I have a rhino iguana, a couple carpet pythons. I just adopted a Mexican king snake. I have a blue tongue skink, a handful of ball pythons, a couple western hognose snakes. Like I said, I have a tricolor hognose snake, and corn snake. That's albino corn snake that someone happened to find, and they didn't know if it was a pet or not, so they turned it in, and I adopted that one as well. And then I also just adopted. Well, I bought one, and then I adopted a little baby boa, and then I have another turtle that I just got this week. So I haven't even seen him yet.
So I'm curious, out of all the animals you own, what is your favorite?
Oh gosh, right now I have to say it's probably a tie between my frog and the rhino iguana that I have.
Okay.
Yeah, the rhino iguanas are awesome, man. They have a sanctuary and
they're awesome. They've got great personalities. And the little one I have is, got him fresh hatched, and is probably the most of my animals I've adopted or have been given to me, in some regard or the other. Usually after the previous owner can't care for them or whatever. That's honestly how a lot of mine came to be at the house. So there hasn't been a lot of animals that I've actually raised and had since they were little bitty babies, and I think that's probably one of the reasons that the rhino is in the top probably 2 or 3 of my favorites right now, because I actually got him as a baby, and I've had to work with him to gain his trust and gain his affection, and this quarantine actually has really helped out with that, because I've been home all the time, so I've been able to hold him all the time, take him out all the time, and so he's my pal. He's got a lot of personality, and he's super, super, super smart. I just think he's great. I can't wait till he gets big.
No, that's awesome. I mean, I feel like even with myself, with the number of turtles that I own, you always have a favorite, and it always has some kind of story behind it. Ed, what's your favorite? I'm curious.
You already know. It's got to be Big Mama. I've had her from the very beginning. I got her, for chump change, just on a whim, on like Craigslist, I think, and she's turned out to be like, she did not look like a looker, and she's a concentric diamondback, and she's like dark brown, ugly looking thing, but I didn't care. She's turned out to be like phenomenal, huge, just pretty white. I mean, plus she's literally puppy dog tame. Like all she wants is and you can get a turtle come up to you, not even a tortoise, but a turtle, come up to you and just want that. So.
Yeah, I think my favorite is probably my turtle Squirt. She is like 14 years old. She's only a stink pot musk turtle, and I think she's my favorite because I've almost killed her probably 5 or 6 times from the time I was 14 and I didn't do a water change for like 6 months to the time I went to college and we were having a house party and my roommate moved the sofa and hit the cabinet the turtle was on, shattered the glass, and the turtle went scurrying across the floor, water everywhere. Like, I don't know, like in retrospect, I'm like, damn, I've been a terrible owner. Okay. But she's still alive and kicking. I mean, she almost drowned. She got her leg sucked into a canister filter. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, man. Definitely my favorite. And she was a $10 turtle from Pet Supermarket. So.
And now that you mention that, still, I think my second would be my musk turtle, my female. I mean, I got her back when I was in college for wildlife, and we were doing field bio, and literally our class just consisted of going out with a sand net and just finding whatever you can find, collecting whatever you can get, coming back and bringing it. I mean, she was literally the size of probably a dime, and had to spoon feed her essentially, and she's probably like, I don't even know, 12 years old now. So
Hey, they might be sisters, man. You never know. I am curious about something, Jenna. What all right, do you remember years ago there was and it's not so many years ago, but there was a show on TV called Dirty Jobs, where the guy went out and did, dirty jobs in America. I'm not saying your job is a dirty job, but it could be. I don't know. What is probably the situation, whether herping, in school, doesn't matter, that you think you've been in that you didn't expect? Like, wow, I didn't expect that I'd have to do something like this. Does that make sense?
It does.
In a good way or bad way?
Like eating poop, I don't know. It could be anything.
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't had too many crazy moments. I think if I had to, I don't know. I honestly, nothing surprises me anymore. And as far as like in school and in work and just in general, I haven't had any super like uh anything crazy happen. Honestly, it's all been, I mean, pretty typical. But if I had to pick a moment that was just unexpected, it's actually last year. I was on my way home from the Florida Keys. I spent the day in the Keys, and I was actually on my way to a dance recital um, for one of my friend's kids. And I was super late, got stuck in traffic. And while I was driving up one of the roads to get to the highway, I actually passed a python. This is in my free time, not at work. I just passed a python on the side of the road, and um, I was like, well, I'm already late. I didn't think I was going to make it to the dance recital. And I actually backtracked and went and caught a snake, which I had no idea how big it was. And it turned out to be about 10 feet, which is the biggest python I've ever captured by myself. Nobody else was around. I just pulled off on the side of the road and walked up to the snake. And I actually I was on the phone with one of my friends, and I was like, well, I guess I'm catching it. Like, I'm here, so might as well. And I actually decided it would be smart to grab it with my left hand because I have my phone in my right hand and I'm right-handed. And I grabbed a little bit too low, and it ended up turning around, biting me a little bit, which, it's not that big of a deal. It's a 10-foot snake, but it really doesn't hurt. It's literally nothing. It's like little pinpricks. And I just had to deal with it on the side of the road for a few minutes until I could, call the appropriate people and let them know, hey, like, this just happened.
Snake, man.
Yeah. So the best part of it was that I was actually able to transport it back to my office. And then I was able to leave it at the office and drive and make it to the dance recital before the 5-year-old had even gone on stage. I made it with plenty of time. So that was probably one of the most unexpected expected things. I mean, we run into pythons all the time just driving around, even in your free time. But that was,
Burmese,
it was,
right?
yeah, it was a Burmese python in the middle of the afternoon. Like, I was so unexpected because I wasn't even looking for it. I did not think anything of it until I drove past, and I was like, that was a snake.
Wow. 10 foot, that would be hard to miss. Not no little turtles scurrying around.
Oh, I love all the turtles.
I do have a question.
Never get tired of them.
You because I want to speak more towards the lines of, any, young ladies or whatever that might be watching, or so you had obviously your dad was very supportive in whatever, he just wanted almost, I don't know if was your family kind of like, in the wildlife at all, or was he just like, hey, look, if this is something you want, I totally support you, just from like a supportive role? Because I think that's key, especially when it comes to parents and whatever you might have, because they might not love what you love, but as long as they're supportive of what you are, so how did all that work?
So my parents don't do wildlife at all. We grew up in the middle of the woods, and they were always just so supportive of me, which I was always very grateful for. Like I said, when I was younger, I had a little red-eared slider for a while when I was a really little kid. Before I was taking care of it, my parents were, taking care of my pet turtle. I was too young to really understand anything, and so the snake that my dad actually let me get was like my first real pet, my first real reptile. And him and my mother have both always just been very like, go outside, go do things. They were, they would let me bring stuff home, and I'd be like, oh look, I found a turtle, I found a snake. Like, they were totally fine. And my dad's not afraid of snakes or anything like that. Like, there's been a couple times I remember growing up where he's brought snakes home that he's passed on the road, and he'll go and scoop them into a trash can and bring them home to show them to us, and then we just let him go. And all sorts of stuff. But as far as like, but it was like neighborhood stuff. It was never like, go out of your way to find anything. We never really like, we went to Yellowstone, we go to national parks, but we never really like focused in on any reptile or anything like that, just being out in nature. And so that really fostered, my love for the outdoors and for animals. But I will have to say, like, their support, both my father and my mother's support, have gone above and beyond the more passionate that I have gotten about reptiles. And one time in particular, I remember I was actually away at college, and the Diamondback Terrapin project that I worked on as a volunteer, first ever volunteer research experience, was that terrapin nesting project that we have just up the street from my house. And I remember one day we needed volunteers to go check the nest cages on the beach, make sure nothing had hatched, nothing was sitting in the sun. And out of all the volunteers we had, not a single person was available. I don't remember if it was a holiday or if there just was no one around. And I remember, calling up my parents and being like, hey, like, can you go? Like, I know you don't know where it's at. I can, send you a location, and you just have to walk, the 1.5 miles of beach to the end and back. And I was like, can you just go check? I'm in school. I wasn't around, or else I would have come and done it. And, they were more than happy to go. And, they had my dad come out with me once to do the nesting before, but it wasn't really their thing. And so I just remember being able to call and say, hey, like, this is something that I love and we need help. Can you go? And they were both more than happy to go and check the nests. And to me, that was just a really great moment to see that they were just as happy to help me out as I was to be involved in the project in the first place. So it's always been great. And over the years, like, I get messages from my dad all the time now. Being in Florida, he'll send me pictures. He's like, I swept this snake out of the road. He keeps a broom in the back of his truck. He's like, I swept it out of the road. What is it? Or he'll call me and be like, oh, I just moved a turtle. So I'm always excited to hear from him, telling me like all the different things he moves out of the road, which is something that I know we did growing up. But the fact that he still calls and tells me that whenever he moves anything, I love. So it's been really great for me to not only be raised in an environment where they are thankful, for nature and for being outdoors. So not only was I raised in it, but I've been able to kind of get the same feedback growing up, being like, hey, look, like, we know you love these guys, so look, we saw one, like, just wanted to share with you, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so you're pretty much getting to reciprocate the influence.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Go ahead, Ed.
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask a question. I think you had mentioned yesterday when we were checking the tech that you have siblings. Do any of them care about reptiles, or is this like I don't know?
Yeah. So I have a younger sister who, she loves my first ball python. That's like her favorite snake. She always tells me that if I ever want to get rid of him, that she'll take him. She doesn't work with reptiles or anything like that, but she's a nature girl. She'll go out and she'll hike. But as far as like working or keeping reptiles, she doesn't keep anything. And then I actually have a twin sister who shares my interest in reptiles. We actually just went hiking the other day and found a couple box turtles. And So she comes out and we'll go hike around. But with her, it's, she's just as passionate, loves everything, but she's got terrible allergies, like all the different grasses, like even being outside is really difficult, and any animal with fur is difficult. So she doesn't work with reptiles, but she does keep a couple. She's a ball python and a sand boa, and a corn snake.
Okay.
Hopefully my twins don't have that.
I didn't hear what you said, Ed.
I was saying, hopefully my twins don't have any of that.
Oh yeah, Ed has twins on the way. Any words of advice from a twin?
Oh gosh, it's gonna be great, but it's gonna be terrible because you're gonna have two to deal with at the same time. Hearing from my mother said that we were a lot, but we were good. She said we were good twins. Both running in different. And a girl, so. Yeah, okay, we were running in different directions at the same time. So she said that was always the hardest part. But I mean, I think it'll be good. Like, you're gonna have two kids that are gonna grow up together, and I mean, me and my sister are completely different. We have share that interest in reptiles, but she's very, like, I am technologically challenged. I have, difficulty with computer programs, getting my computer to run well, and she is like on top of it. She can fix anything. She can write computer code. Like, she is absolutely phenomenal technology wise, which is a skill I don't have. But it's nice because I can just, lean on her a little bit whenever I need help. So with any luck, you'll have just similar enough that they get along and will hang out and keep each other busy, but just different enough that, they can bring different skill sets to the table.
So I was gonna ask you, so did you think, so anyone that wants to, say, a young lady that, out of high school or even before that, like you were 14, wanted to pursue something like this, but you're too young to have a job or too young to have an animal, like, what would you say would be the best route to take to get involved? Is it to just volunteer, just to look up just anything and anything, even if it's not like your, like, quote unquote, like maybe passion, or you don't even know what your passion is as far as animal wise goes? Is it great to just get involved in anything and just see where it leads?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was lucky enough to have met enough people, and honestly, such a short period of time. I didn't even really start considering, a career in wildlife, or even working really with anything outside of captivity, until the end of 2013. So it really hasn't been that long. Like 2013, 2014, I was in college and met a herpetology professor who really, spurred me on my way. And until then, I had no experience. I hadn't volunteered with the reptiles. I hadn't worked with reptiles. I worked as a summer camp teacher, before anything else. And so I think the best thing would be definitely if you have, places to volunteer at, definitely would be the way to go. I mean, it really is so simple. It depends on your area too. Like, you really just have to see what's available. I know there's usually wildlife rehabilitation centers that people can go and volunteer at. Even if you go, for a couple hours a week, or, they say they have laundry to do, you just go and you're the person who goes and picks up the laundry and does the laundry for them, and then you just have communication. I mean, you really just need to talk to people and network. Talking to people is probably the best thing you could do, and it's how you keep your business circle, but your friend circle. It's how you learn what you like. And that was the one thing with me. I went in and I was like, I'm going to work with snakes. That's it. I was a snake person. I was like, snakes, only snakes. I'm not working with anything besides snakes. Like, I had a pet snake. I was like, that was where I was at. And that when someone actually offered me, when I was an undergrad, offered me a position to work with turtles, and I said no. I was like, no, I don't want a paid job working with turtles. I want to work with snakes. I have zero interest in doing this. They literally just handed it to me. They're like, here, it's yours. All you have to do is say yes. I was like, no, I'm not interested. I don't want to work with turtles. Like, I want to work with snakes. And what did I just say? All of my early work experience was with turtles. I worked almost exclusively with, terrapins and map turtles for 4 years, and then came down to Florida, and that's where I really got to branch out into lizards and snakes and crocodilians. But until then, I really just say, take what you can get. And I still, to this day, I have not worked either professionally or really in my free time with a lot of mammals. I do actually do a little bit of bird stuff on the side. I have a really good friend who works with bird of prey. And so I'll go and work with him, and I actually really, really enjoy raptors. And, that's something that I never would have considered until I was given the opportunity to work with them. So just anything, even if you're scared of it, even if it's not your primary interest, it's not what caught your attention. You really don't know until you do it. So just get your hands in any project that pops up, any volunteer experience that pops up. I just say go for all of it. And you know what? Worst case scenario, you work with those animals, or you volunteer at that location for a month, if that, and you either realize that, hey, I like this, or you're like, not for me, and you can move on to the next thing. But until you do it, you have no idea what you're gonna like, if it's gonna be something that really drives your passion.
Yeah, the bar, like I did a little bit with the raptors and the handling, and I tell you what, it was cool with the red-tailed hawk, and then I was in front of a classroom of kids, and they strapped me up, and put a barred owl on me. This thing had a whole 20-30 kids to look at. Tell me why this thing straight at me with them big black eyes clucking its beak. I'm like, dude, come on, man, don't think about it. I was like, come on. But no, it was cool. Like, I mean, it just, who has a giant bird on their arm, it was just a cool, different experience until you put yourself out there to be uncomfortable. Especially when you deal with animals, you better be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
I have a question for you, and I guess this more so is from like an education perspective. So I know you had mentioned when you initially went off to school, you were doing like a zoology, trying to be in a zoo, and then you switched to wildlife biology. In your experience, going to school, what was the big difference in terms of coursework, interest, like direction, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. You can still get a position at a zoo facility with a biology degree. You don't have to major in a zoo, science or zoology just to get in at a zoo facility. I've not worked at a zoo yet, but it really comes down to experience and who you know. But coursework wise, the big difference for me was the degree was just very narrow. Like schoolwork was about the same. You're learning different species. You're learning about different husbandry activities. In zoology, the zoo science is more focused on like keeping and husbandry wise. And I learned about birds and reptiles and mammals, and how they all have different requirements for enrichment, and how you really need to tailor the husbandry and the enrichment for those animals that you are caring for at the facility you're at. And I think there's a place for that. But I know for me, I just kept thinking like, well, what if I never worked in a zoo? And so I was just like, what if I don't like it? What if I go and work in a zoo and I hate it? And I spent all this time getting a degree to work with captive animals, and I realized it's not for me. That to me, it just shocked me. I was like, it's so narrow that like maybe I won't want to work in a zoo. Maybe I won't want to work in an aquarium. Maybe I just want to work with animals. And which is why I switched. But the coursework was similar, but the mindset was different. I still had to learn biology. I still had to learn different mammals, birds, reptiles, their physiology, how they function, different nutritional requirements and habitat requirements. And but it gave a bigger picture, like how they tie into the ecosystem, and a lot more like how they relate to other wildlife and other animals outside in the real world, as opposed to within a captive setting. So that was the big difference, was just the mindset of like having a captive kept animal versus animals that you're working with in the wild. You want to minimize stress for both, but in the wild, you want to minimize stress and minimize habituation to humans. Whereas in the zoo field, a lot of times getting animals habituated and getting them trained to respond to commands and getting them okay to have human beings around while they are being cared for is a safety issue. And it's, important for, facilities to be able to train those animals to respond in that manner. Whereas like with the wildlife, we want it to behave wild. We want it to stay, crazy. We just want to be able to get our hands on it real quick, and then, add our tag, clip it, give it whatever marking we need, get our measurements, and then we want to throw it back, and hopefully it'll be as minimally stressful as possible. And we don't want to get those animals habituated. So it's just the mindset was the big difference.
Cool. No, I appreciate it.
I think I have one final question, because I think it almost ties, in all this in retrospect, is because you can, like how you said, what if you don't like it, or it's almost like the fear of the unknown. Also, you love to do, but you don't get it. When you're even now or even then, did you have any kind of goals? Like, as far as, like, even right now, say, do you have any specific goals? You're working with what you love to work with, but do you have goals long term, as far as, like, whether it's, helping a certain kind of animal down the road, or just something, just make an impact, because that's really why you want to get in the field, right? Is to make some kind of impact for that animal's life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, I don't know. I can't see myself, way in the future and be like, this is what I want to, I always say, this is what I want to be when I grow up, and I'm, 25 years old. So I'm growing up. But I think ultimately just being able to, talk to different people and, work with different animals and just have the experience. I mean, I social media is a great tool, and I get a lot of messages from people asking, how can I work with animals? How do I do what you do? And for tips and stuff. And so I think probably my overarching goal would be just to be able to talk to other people and help guide them, because I know growing up and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, if I did not have people who were willing to share their experience and share their, trials and tribulations on how they got to where they got, I would not be here. And not only that, but being supportive and being realistic. It's not a walk in the park. It's a lot of work. And you are going to fail. You are going to have things that happen that are beyond your control, whether that's, something, you get an injury, or you end up, working in a field that you didn't want to work in. You work with an animal you didn't want to work with, and you just don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And how do you, work up to that ultimate achievement, whether it's the animal you want to work with or the area you want to work in. I think just being able to be another voice and, let people know, like, hey, this is how I did it, and it might be different, than you, and but there's different pathways you can go. And I think just knowing that there are other options and other ways to get to where you're going. You don't have to necessarily go to school. I went to school. School was something that was easy for me, and so I kept on with it, and this is how I got to where I'm at. But there are plenty of other people out there who will tell you, like, either they went to school or they didn't go to school, and they're still able to be perfectly happy working with the animals they're working with, whether it's in captivity, whether it's breeding, any of that stuff, or just, working a regular 9-to-5 job and then doing animal stuff on the weekend as their hobby. There's so many different ways you can go. And honestly, that's something that I've considered before too. I'm like, well, maybe I don't want to do research forever. Maybe I just want to, go work at Trader Joe's, and I'll keep things as a hobby on the side, and go do education shows with I call him my bird guy, that kind of stuff. Like, I've thought about all that, and I think it's hard to pick a path. So just knowing that at any point in time you have so many different options, and you just have to put your effort towards what makes you happy, I think. And just letting people know that it's okay to not kind of fit that mold, is probably the best way to go. But, as far as like a pinpoint goal of like, oh, I want to be like a state wildlife biologist or anything like that, like, I don't know what I want to be. I'm just going to, keep going and see where I end up.
Any plans to be a doctor?
No, actually I was a child that for a while I was like, oh, I'm gonna be a vet, or even anything like that. And I don't have any desire. I'm still working on my master's degree. I don't have any desire to get a PhD right now. It's a lot of schoolwork. And as far as like anything medical or like veterinary wise, there's just something about having an animal, like just having that life balance in your hands. So like doing like any type of like operation or anything like that really makes, like, it doesn't sit well with me. It really bothers me. As far as like looking at like necropsies or like looking at deceased animals and looking at, maybe reasons why they died, I'm totally comfortable with that. But as far as like being able to like medically diagnose another living being, it's not something that interests me, I should say. I've never done it, so maybe if I decided to go for it and try it, I'd like it. But as of right now, I don't think it's for me.
No, that's great. I think there's a little ignorance for myself. When I was growing up, I told my mom I wanted to be a herpetologist, and that was just something I found on Google. And, I didn't end up going that direction, but I think a lot of people don't realize the different options where you can still work with animals. You could be a wildlife biologist, you can be a zookeeper, you could be a vet, you can be a business owner and own a reptile store or animal store. Like there's a lot of options. And I think it's important that we, let future generations know, like, if animals is what you care about and, that's what you want to do, then, put yourself in a position to go in different paths and find the path that best works for you. Like one of our future, go ahead, Ed, my bad.
No, I just said break the mold.
Yeah, you could break the mold. One of our future guests that's going to be on the podcast, he's 26 and has 2 reptile stores already. Like that's the direction he went in, I just think it's great what you're doing. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking with us and giving up your valuable family time while we're sweating to death in Florida.
I appreciate you guys having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's rare, to have someone with such good influence, like that, especially with the platform, be able to actually navigate it and use it for, the greater good, which is, like you said, we have that tool nowadays. Go full on and utilize that, because that's influenced more lives than you could ever imagine and see.
Absolutely. And I was gonna say, as a last note for the social media platforms, people reach out to me all the time about, oh, hey, if I am in Florida, like, can I talk to you? Can we go look for snakes? Like, can we chat? And for the most part, if I'm available, I don't mind meeting up and talking to people and guiding them. But that people reach out to me, and I know I've reached out to people on social media and said, hey, I'm going to be in the area. I see you work in the area. I am interested in coming out with you. Is that possible? So use social media, use that tool. Reach out to people. If you see someone down up the street from you, or the state next to you, who is working with those animals that you're interested in working with, shoot them a message. And not everyone's going to say yes, obviously, and some projects are sensitive, some work is sensitive, but shoot them a message and say, hey, I'm going to be in town for a weekend, or can I plan a trip in town for a weekend and come work with you? Can I come see what you do? And that's another really good way to just you don't have to routinely volunteer at a facility, but you can go and you can talk to people and connect and see if that's a project that you're interested in, and see if you like working outside with the bugs and the sweat and the mosquitoes and all that stuff. Like, you can go out and try it. No strings attached. If you just ask someone, if like, hey, is it possible for me to come out with you? So definitely, use social media, use that tool to talk to people, especially if, vacations. It could be anything. I have grandparents in the Panhandle, and I reached out to a couple sea turtle biologists in the Panhandle. And I was like, yo, I'm gonna be here for the week. Can I come through? And we made it happen. I was able to go be a sea turtle biologist for the day. So
that's awesome.
Anything is possible. You just gotta speak up, reach out to people, and if someone says no, someone says no. Somebody else might say yes. So don't let that limit you.
That's a great way to end the podcast. Hey, I'm at a loss at words. Ed, any last comments before we end this podcast?
No, I think we've hit it on the nail, and I just hope that that this definitely actually serves as a tool for not even just women, but also men, anything, both alike. For just finding your lane. Pretty much, this is being able to a good building block upon our last podcast about influence. And if there's anything else, the only reason why you and me are even doing this is to promote that influence, to share other people's stories. And that's the best way you can ever be an influence and make a difference in this world, is to let people have a voice, to be heard, and let everything else fall into place.
No, you hit it on the nail. Jenna, I appreciate you for coming on. This has been What the Shell. Shell. And we are done with episode 8. We appreciate it. Thanks again.
All right, guys. Have a good one, guys.
You too. Thank you, guys.